But the question is, why would we wish to live in such a world? In other words, why would you want your imagination to be something that turns into reality every time? I don't know if you know the story of the king who had the golden touch, who could touch everything that was gold. But what if everything you thought about in the future would come true? Would this be a very pleasant world to live in? I don't think it would actually be a very pleasant world to live in. We live in an open universe where there's uncertainty and creativity. So here's the question. Do you want to learn how to use the future to kill uncertainty? The answer is no. It's not desirable and it's not doable. So if it's not desirable and doable to kill uncertainty, what do we do with our imagination? Is it really this effort to lay down railroad tracks and to say this is the way it's going to be and then never deviate, always follow the same path? I don't think so. So one of the things that we've been working at UNESCO is something called futures literacy. Futures literacy is a capability. It's a competency. And in today's session, what we want to do is we want to give you a few kind of insights into this capability. And it's a capability that allows us to imagine the future in many different ways and for many different reasons. And as you will see from the experiences that you'll hear about in this session, when you look at the future in different ways and see different things, you begin to open up to the world around you. You begin to realize that uncertainty is not such an enemy, but it's actually a resource, a way to access change. And so, futures literacy as a capability is a way to introduce us to something we do all the time, but don't think about very much, which is how do we use our imagination? Why do we use our imagination? So we have a great panel, and we're not going to spend a long time giving little speeches. We want to have also some questions. So I'd be really keen to hear your ideas on how you think about the future. How do you use your imagination? Why do you use your imagination? And so we can have a bit of interaction. And then tomorrow morning, we're going to be running a futures literacy laboratory. And a laboratory is what it sounds like. It's a place where we run experiments. And those experiments are done with the people who participate. Because in a futures literacy laboratory, the raw material for the experiment comes from your ideas, what's in your head. So perhaps we start off, who wants to begin? You want to start with some examples or start with an example? Go first, okay.
Good afternoon. Thank you, first of all, ISESCO for inviting us to be here to talk about our work and our passion, let's say, and also thank you to the people who've been waiting for a while. Thank you for your patience. My name is Loes Damhoff. I teach at the University of Applied Sciences, Hanze University, in the northern part of the Netherlands. And what Riyal was just describing, that future literacy is a capability, it's a competency. Now, my university is a competency-based university, and the skill is the competency that I teach is future literacy. I do not do that alone. We have a UNESCO chair, a team at the university, and we train and teach students in this capability, this mindset, competency, skill, attitude. We do this mainly in master programs because the master programs at my university evolve around transition. They are interdisciplinary, they are about energy, healthy aging, leadership, entrepreneurship, complex interdisciplinary areas and industries. And my university is convinced that future literacy is the capability that allows students to learn in complexity. not to eliminate it or to eliminate or kill uncertainty, but to create or develop a different attitude and different relationship with complexity and uncertainty. And when you want to teach students, maybe you remember that when you guys were students and learning, that it starts with the teachers, right? So it starts with yourself. If I want to teach my students to have a certain skill, I need to develop it myself first. So we also train master faculty in this capability. And we not only teach them how to have this skill, which takes practice. Like any capability, if you want to learn how to play the piano or learn how to read, you got to practice. It just doesn't come in one workshop tomorrow morning, although we will do our best. We cannot guarantee you will be future literate after a few hours tomorrow morning. But will hopefully sparkle your interest. So this capability needs to be practiced. So we train and teach students to design these laboratories, help them facilitate, so they can not only feel the impact it has on themselves and develop the competency, but also how to install or foster that capability onto others. So to really practice it in their own internships, work, study program, etc. So that way, we're not only helping them develop the capability, but we're also building capacity. So to actually bring it further, and that just becomes a sustainable way of thinking. And that's difficult because in any different skill or mindset, you can't just put it into a matrix or teach it on Tuesday morning from 9 to 11, and that's it. It really needs to be integrated in curricula. So that's what we do. And we do research on the impact, the value that they create once they've learned that capability. And I do that in the Netherlands, but not only in the Netherlands. Actually, a couple of months ago, I was in Ben Greer, here in Morocco, to train faculty at the UMCP University to also teach them this capability so they could teach their students to think, to apply this skill. Working in Nigeria, training people in Somaliland. So it's not just in that part of the world, but we're also training other people, helping them build the capacity. So, yep.
Who's also did it in Vietnam and China and all around the world. And really what this is about, in some senses, is everybody here knows what statistics are about, right? We heard about statistics in the morning session. You talk about percentages, you talk about averages. Okay? And that means it can be useful for medicine, it can be useful for finance, it can be useful for all areas that we think about. We use statistics to describe the world. But you know what? We also use the future. Our idea of the future, and it was used this morning, the idea of convergence and catch-up. I converge, I catch up. All of us have in our heads, because of the way we are as a species, the idea that you grow up. You're little, and you grow up. And you become like your big sister. You become like your big brother. You become like your hero. And then, when you're their age, you go, now wait a second. I don't want to be like them. I want to be me. I want to be who I am. And that means that your imagination is challenged. Today, when we go around the world and people say, let's all be like New York. Let's all be like Singapore. Let's all be like Dubai. Let's all be like Shanghai. You say, wait a second. Isn't there a problem with this image? Why do we all want to be like that? Is it tenable? Is it desirable? Is it a good way to live? This is a question of our imagination and how we use our imagination. Well,
You're going to leave me with imagination. Good afternoon. My name is Jessica Bland. I'm a UK-based researcher now. But for the last 3 years, I was actually based in Dubai, where I did a lot of work in my specialist area, which is around technology and the future. So I have spent the last 10 years often working between policymakers and those in government who set everything from regulation to our curriculum, and the technologies that are changing all of those things. And I guess I'm a graduate of the Capacity School of Futures, which is that I took and I learned to have the confidence to take some of the skills of futures and apply them to the specific questions of my area. seeing it as a capacity, not just a group of specific templates or methodologies you could use. So to use one example, one of the tricky areas we've heard about today is around data governance, data ethics, data and privacy. How do we keep information about ourselves as private as we want online? In policy-making circles, this can be a difficult conversation because you have very technical people who understand databases, they understand how the internet works much better than I do. And then you have those that are concerned with the values of society, our right to a private life, our right for equality in terms of who uses our data, and the right to be able to work in the way you want to. And so we used Futures as a way of bringing those different communities together. And very specifically, what we did is we used this idea of imagination to create imagined people in the future who lived in different kinds of future world, and asked our technical colleagues, including those from IBM and Google, and our colleagues in government from ministries that deal with education, that deal with digital infrastructure, that deal with education. And we asked them to imagine which of those characters in the future they wanted their society to look like, or which one of those they hoped or aspired to have, and which aspects of those characters they didn't want to have. And so we had, by going through a series of characters like that, we were able to have a positive, empowering conversation that then moved us back to some of the technical conversations about what kind of data infrastructure we wanted in the country. But through the power of imagination, by using, in a loose sense, when we were using in the way that worked for the people in the room, these Futures capabilities, we were able to have a much, much broader, much more inclusive conversation about technology. Thank you.
So that points out that, look, everybody here has seen a Hollywood movie. Most of us have seen Hollywood movies that talk about the future. Most of us realize that they can produce very appealing, even if they're bad, images, powerful images. But that's not your image, that's Hollywood's image. Where does your image of the future come from?
Pour ma part, je vais le faire en français. Je m'appelle Éva, je travaille avec Riyal à l'UNESCO en littératie des futurs. Tout particulièrement, c'est les projets qu'on porte en Afrique. Et ça me tient tout particulièrement à cœur, et donc je vais commencer sur le pourquoi avant d'avancer sur le comment. Le futur, et on en a beaucoup parlé ce matin, c'est deux choses à la fois. Enfin, c'est plein de choses, c'est un tout. Mais c'est à la fois un terrain de jeu et en même temps un révélateur de nos valeurs. Et donc en ce sens, c'est un terrain de jeu, c'est-à-dire que c'est un espace de possibilités, mais en étant révélateur de valeurs, ça montre aussi un espace de limitation. Et ce qui est intéressant, c'est de voir à quel point, généralement, quand on interroge nos différents participants dans le cadre des ateliers qu'on organise, les premiers éléments qu'on voit en termes de futurs probables, futurs souhaitables, qui sont des échantillons de futurs possibles, généralement, on observe beaucoup de convergence, qui traduit généralement une limitation de nos imaginaires. Et la question qui se pose, c'est s'il y a une limitation de nos imaginaires, s'il y a des futurs qu'on entend plus que d'autres, est-ce que ça veut dire qu'il y a des futurs qui sont imposés? Est-ce que par le travail qu'on fournit ou les questions qu'on se pose, est-ce qu'on n'aurait pas tendance à renforcer certains futurs au profit d'autres? Et si tel est le cas, pourquoi? Et tout particulièrement dans un contexte africain ou même des contextes postcoloniaux de manière plus large, cette question, elle résonne beaucoup sur la capacité qu'on a à définir des problématiques. C'est-à-dire que la façon dont on pense à la fois le problème et les solutions sont très liées au système de valeurs qu'ils sous-tendent. Et donc toutes les questions qu'on a posées ce matin sur les questions de responsabilité, d'agentivité, quels acteurs on met devant et quels acteurs se prononcent et comment ils formulent les problématiques qu'on rencontre, en fait, vont se retrouver en écho par rapport aux discussions qu'on a sur le futur. Et donc je trouve ça toujours très marrant d'utiliser l'expression la capacité à utiliser le futur, parce que cette approche effectivement très mécanique et industrielle du futur paraît étonnante, mais elle nous permet aussi de voir qu'il y a des possibilités, des choses à explorer auxquelles on n'aurait peut-être pas pensé ou on ne se permettait pas de penser. Et donc moi, ce que j'ai pu voir en termes d'exemples, le dernier laboratoire, je peux en citer un, par exemple à Libreville, qui était donc sur le futur de Libreville en 2050. On travaillait avec la mairie de Libreville. Et effectivement, il y avait une partie des enjeux et problématiques qui étaient dans le titre, la question de la durabilité et la question de la paix qui revenaient régulièrement. Et on était effectivement sur des imaginaires très axés autour de la technologie, des outils et de l'aspect digital. Et puis finalement, à la fin du laboratoire, certes, on pensait à un monde qui était guidé par la technologie, mais à côté de ça, on se posait des questions sur comment on peut penser la contingence dans notre modèle. Et c'est souvent en fait des questions qui se posent, même par exemple dans un laboratoire qu'on organisait à Nairobi sur le futur de la bioéconomie en Afrique de l'Est, un événement organisé avec la Commission est-africaine, où on passe d'un modèle où on pense une économie qui en fait est basée sur le passé, c'est-à-dire un passé européen qui devrait être le futur du continent africain, et finalement on commence à se poser des questions, mais qu'est-ce qu'on fait sur place, qu'est-ce qu'on veut pour nous et ce qui revient de manière récurrente, c'est en fait qui sommes-nous et où voulons-nous aller, et est-ce qu'on est prêt à se laisser porter par des choses qu'on ne connaît pas et qu'on ne comprend pas, mais qui nous composent.
So think about it this way, is that the imagination is like a muscle. If you don't use it, it's just not very strong. And the question becomes, how do you develop that capability? How do you work on that capability? And there are lots of different tools. You know, we all know that different people learn different ways. That's now commonplace. We understand that. So the same thing goes for learning how to use your imagination. There are different tools that are effective in different places. But think about it at the next stage. When you have a place where people can read and write, everybody can read and write, it changes what's possible. Everybody in this room, I suppose, has a telephone, right? We've all got our cell phones. Well, when everybody has a cell phone, it changes what's going on. So if you think about the muscle of our imagination, developing that muscle so that everybody is stronger changes the situation. It's a capability. But interestingly enough, despite the fact that our imagination and our images of the future are unbelievably powerful, it's what you fear, it's what you hope for. Those images of the future, AI, it was referred to earlier, and Frankenstein, Terminator, Skynet, the AIs are going to take over. This fear, which is 2 centuries, more than 2 centuries, more older than that, this fear of our own tools is a familiar fear. How do we understand those fears? How do we get a better grasp on the anticipatory systems and processes? Well, there, we're doing a lot of research, and there's a lot of research issues. So,
thank you. Hello, good afternoon. My name is Claudia Baisini. I'm finalizing a PhD in philosophy on the role of language in shaping how we understand situations and how we frame them. And I will pick up on this intelligence thing because one of the particular cases that I'm looking at is exactly the case of the study of intelligence since when it was conceptualized by ancient Greeks to later philosophers to the scientific revolution and so on. And I would like to point out that very often when we think about the future, we have this tendency to think about the future as something that is out there and we need to grasp and describe and capture its characteristics as loyally as possible to supposedly reality that is out there waiting for us to prepare ourselves and to control it. But I think one of the very strong elements of futures literacy as a capability is that it kind of takes away that picture of the fixed future out there waiting for us and is empowering also in the sense that it makes us understand what is our role in building, shaping, or creating the future. And one of the elements that are very important in that is to realize, to become more aware of what we are projecting onto that future. So in particular, since my focus is language, we very often use the same words, but with a different meaning. So when we think about AI, for example, well, what is AI? We talk about the future of AI, but what is AI? What do we want it for? What are its properties or characteristics? And why is it called artificial intelligence? What do we mean with intelligence? Pierre before talked about human intelligence a little bit. And these are concepts, intelligence for example, that do not only describe what intelligence means, but they also have an evaluative element that enforces the use of the term. What we call intelligent is what we appreciate, admire, like, etc., etc. And so because we appreciate it, admire it, and like it, etc., etc., we want to be like that prescribed model of intelligence. The dominating model of human intelligence is the one used by the mainstream to calculate IQ, or G, the general intelligence factor. That by many scientists is called analytic intelligence, because it's based on certain capabilities that resemble the computer metaphor of the mind. But that's not the only theory. That's the theory that has established itself as a paradigm for many reasons that I don't want to discuss here. Many hold it's because it's the most scientific. That's very debatable. If we look back, we realize, instead of forward, but we sometimes need to look back to understand how to go forward or to find inspiration. The ancient Greeks looked at the intellect as the characteristic of the human as different from the animal. Aristotle looked at it as quick wit. Plato had the forms. We don't need to go there. Later on, we had Montaigne, one of the pioneers of the Nouvelle École, yeah, who considered intelligence the not conforming to what the mass does. The unintelligent was the conformist for Montaigne. Pascal was kind of on that line. Adam Smith theorized about intelligence as well. He argued that everybody, Hobbes as well, everybody is pretty much the same at birth. And then what differentiates the intelligent man from the unintelligent is basically where they, how their life played out, what they managed to, what capabilities they managed to develop or do exercise and so on. Then came the scientific revolution, the need to quantify, to measure. Alfred Binet developed his tests in France with a very general idea of intelligence. He clarified that what he was looking at was the superior faculties of the mind, the complex ones. He clarified that we need a pluralistic approach in terms of methods, that it can't be reduced. And above all, he developed his test to identify which children needed help in school, and also to assess their progress, because he believed that intelligence could be developed with exercise. His work was adopted and adapted by the Anglo-American school, which loved statistics, quantification, psychology as a science like the natural sciences. They developed tests, calculated correlations, found G, and that became the general intelligence factor, that became IQ, which became the paradigm of the mainstream. And so now in current language, when we talk about intelligence, we tend to think about these capabilities, but there are also others, more current researchers, who argue that, well, there is also the Confucian idea, which includes wisdom. There is the Kenyan idea, which includes emotional intelligence and capability to relate to others. So my question to you is, If we want to keep the word intelligence in artificial intelligence, I would say we can do a lot. We can decide what we want it to be. We can decide what we want the machine to do based on what kind of intelligence we want to follow. And it may be the mainstream one, but at least we need to ask the question and reflect upon it. And if we choose it, then it's actually a choice we have made.
Well, there's a really crucial issue here, which is how do I name something that doesn't yet exist? How can I imagine something if I don't have a name for it? Okay, everybody's heard of Google, right? But 20 years ago, if I said Google, you'd say, huh? What do you mean? We invent words. And language takes on meaning that plays a crucial role in the way our imagination functions. So the futures we can imagine that excite us, the futures that inspire us, the futures that make us angry, frightened, destructive, those things depend on the way in which we work with language, but also, and this is crucial for futures literacy, the way we feel. The future is not just statistics and words. It's feelings, it's colors, it's images, it's moments. And so when Ted put up his poem about the future, it's about poetry as well. But there's a lot that we don't really understand because we haven't been studying and thinking about how we think about the future. So, Fred?
Thanks very much. My name is Fred Cardin. I'm an independent consultant based in Canada. And I come to this from another world, a world that loves statistics, loves quantification and averages, and has even learned to like qualitative data and actually be able to make use of some of that as well. And that's the world of evaluation, which is really very good at looking back and is really very good at taking data and manipulating it to say what you want it to say. I've always operated on the margins of that field because I always felt something that Mr. Kouakai said this morning, which is that context matters a great deal. And if you don't understand difference, and if you don't understand different people and different places, it's very hard to use what happened in the past. But even so, there has always been something missing in my view, and that is that there is no competence in evaluation to think about the future. So my research endeavor at this point is to say, how do you link thinking about the past and thinking about the future and having that competency built in so that there's a train to move forward instead of always looking back?
This is part of what has been going on over the last few years. UNESCO has established now 11 chairs in future studies, futures literacy. They've been mentioned before. But what that's indicative of is actually that people are beginning to realize that our capability, the competency of thinking about the future, it needs work. We need to do more. And one of the reasons we have this session, and one of the reasons I'm so glad to be working here with ISESCO and UNESCO in partnership, is that we're really trying to move that forward in a way that people can experience. Let me just say one more word about that experience before we go to our last speaker, and then we maybe have some interaction, which is, everybody here can read and write, okay? All of us, I presume, can read and write. But if you tell somebody who can't read and write that they're missing something, well, first of all, they'll say, what am I missing so much? We were saying this morning, if you learn to read and write, you can read a recipe and you can cook something new. Very practical, right? They say, why do I need a new recipe? I'm very happy with the food I'm cooking now. Why should I read and write? Okay, so from the point of view of the skill, the competency of futures literacy, there's the issue of saying, why should you do it? And it's not only because of the hope and the fear that you become able to understand, but it also allows you to anchor your stories in your own history. Because if you have the ability to imagine your own future, do it in a way that's connected to your own ideas of a story, the way stories function. And in different parts of the world, stories function in different ways. They're structured in different ways. What we expect is different. And that allows people to be much more connected to their hopes and to their fears. And so from the point of view of the diversity of cultures, which was talked about earlier, how do we respect that diversity of cultures? One of the key ways is to enable people to reference, to understand how their culture relates to their fears and to their hopes. And that's about developing futures literacy in a very practical way. Because if you say to the person that they don't know how to read, and most other people know how to read, or you say, I know how to read, and you act superior, people will be resentful, they'll be angry. But what we've been doing with the Futures Literacy Laboratories and the Futures Literacy activities, whether it's about creating personas where people can identify with the persona, or whether we're doing it in terms of the bioeconomy and saying, why are we thinking about industrial agriculture in the way that they do it somewhere else? Maybe we should think about it in our way. By doing that, you give people the experience. You're not telling them. They're doing it themselves. They're using their own imagination to see their own ideas of the future. And that learning by doing is a fundamental way to develop this capability and actually allow people to be more empowered when it comes to thinking about the future. We have a last speaker.
Hello, my name is Sumir Mkhlouf. I spent more than almost 14 years working for Microsoft. And I was going around different government, different countries, and preaching technology and education. Thinking that it's so easy, we just use it every day. It's so easy, just use technology, guys. We have technology, use it. And they did not use it. Still teaching the traditional way. So I left Microsoft and I started my own school. I said, okay, I'm going to do it. And I want you to think, is there anyone here who has a child between the age of 4 and 6? Yeah? 4 and 6? No? A lot of old people. Well, your grandchild. All these students will be looking for a job around 2035 to 2040. The problem is we are still teaching them the same thing, the same way, the same classroom, the same books, the same content that was taught in the 80s and 70s. And we expect them to find jobs and to be, how many of you, when you try to hire somebody, you find that whatever they learned has nothing to do with what's out there. So I said to myself, I'm going to do it. And I did it. It was 3 years ago. The good thing about if you're an engineer and you've been worked to the corporates, multinational world, you have no baggage to take, because most of the schools, they have baggage with them. It's like dinosaurs. So they don't want to change. But I actually started by changing. And the first thing that I did is I said, every student will have a computer. And I'm going to have content online. And I'm going to start with primary school, like that. And I had some parents who came to me, they said, no, Samir, we have a student, I have a child in primary and a child in secondary. What should I do? I said, okay, just bring them. I'll find a solution. And I found a blended learning solution, a platform where students can learn online. Inside the school, not at home. Well, this teacher is the facilitator. So it's like the flipped classroom inside school. And guess what? It worked. My first year of opening, I had 67 students in middle and high school doing that. In my first year of opening, I graduated 4 students with high school diploma. My first year, using a platform, a virtual school from the US. I was the only one, a crazy person, who implemented that in Morocco. Not in Finland, not in Korea, in Morocco, and it worked. The other thing is about technology. Technology, guys, is cheap. Seriously, now technology is not that expensive. It's about pushing it, it's about the mentality. So without further ado, I don't know, I brought a video. Can you please just play this video just to illustrate what I'm talking about? Teacher used to tell the students, go to chapter 1 and start reading. The future is going to be open your computer, click next, and if you need my help, call me. Thank you.
This is a good illustration, I think, of how learning by doing can be an invitation. One of the big questions, though, which I think we all understand, is what's the difference between push and pull? What's the difference between preparation and improvisation? If we think that we know what we should be able to do in advance, then we push a particular idea because we've predicted the future and we think we can know the way the world's going to be. Now, in this room, I think pretty much everybody here understands that that's going to be wrong, that that's never the way history is unfolded. Imitation. I mean, I've been at this game for a long time, for 30 years, and pretty much for that entire time, because it was one of the first things that happened with technology catch-up with the Japanese and the fifth generation computing, was why can't we be like Silicon Valley? Come on, we can do it. No, because the people who made Silicon Valley didn't know they were doing it. They didn't know that it was going to happen. In other words, we live in a complex world. That's a state. It's not more complex or less complex. It is complex. And what does complexity mean? It means it's unknowable in advance. You cannot go to the future. You can say, there's some very strong trends. Climate will change. The sun will rise. Very strong trend. Do you know what you're going to be doing when the sun comes up? Do you know how you will feel? Do you know what your values will be? What kind of government you will have? You don't. Complex human systems, living systems, change all the time. That's the only certainty. And the question is, do we want to think about the future as if change did not happen? Or instead, think about the future in ways that allow us to use change, to be inspired, and to be confident, and to change with the change. So that's one of the really key aspects of futures literacy. We've run out of time. I was like trying to be very disciplined about our time here because I know that there's other sessions. Where's Kais? Can we have 2 questions? 3 questions? 2, 3 questions? Okay, so, okay, 2 questions. Oh, okay, one over there and one over there. I saw him first, so go ahead over there. Go ahead.
الشكر الجزيل لحضراتكم على هذه الورشة الثرية. مداخلتي في 3 شكري الجزيل لحضراتكم على هذه الورشة الثرية ومداخلتي في 3 نقاط على وجه السرعة. النقطة الأولى أننا نعلم أننا نتحدث عن المستقبل وهو الذي لم يحل بعد والذي لم يقع بعد. إذن المستقبل نعلم أنه يتميز باللا يقين. إذن نحن لا نتحدث عن صورة واحدة للمستقبل ولكن نتحدث عن مستقبلات. هنا نتحدث عن أمرين في غاية الأهمية. الأمر الأول وهو الصور الاستطلاعية أو الاستكشافية للمستقبل والصور المعيارية والاستهدافية للمستقبل. وعند بحث المستقبل وبناء المستقبل وتصور المستقبل لابد وأن نأخذ بعين الاعتبار كلا الأمرين. الأمور الاستطلاعية نريد أن نقرأ المستقبل كمن يقف على ربوة عالية يستطلع القادم من بعيد. في نفس الوقت نريد أن نبني نحن هذا المستقبل لأننا كما قلت حضرتك دكتور ميلر أننا في عالم شديد التعقيد وسريع التغير في ذات الوقت إذا لا بد لنا من بوصلة وخريطة توضح لنا معالم السير، وهي الدراسات المستقبلية. وهذا ينقلني إلى نقطة في غاية الأهمية، وهي التعليم من أجل المستقبل، وليس فقط مستقبل التعليم. وهنا أعرج سريعا على مداخلة الدكتور صبحي الطويل في الصباح، وهي رائعة واستفدت منها كثيرا حينما تحدثوا عن التعليم ل 2050 وما بعد. أريد أن أضيف إلى هذه النقطة أننا بصدد الحديث عن مستقبل التعليم، ولكن من الأهمية بمكان الحديث عن التعليم من أجل المستقبل، أي التعليم الذي يستطيع أن يعزز الحس المستقبلي، وأن يعزز ثقافة المستقبل، وأن ينمي القدرة على التفكير المستقبلي. أتمنى أن تتبنى اليونسكو وأن تتبنى الإيسيسكو برنامج لتطوير النظم التعليمية صوب تحقيق القدرة على التفكير المستقبلي. شكرا جزيلا.
Okay, I really enjoyed what you are doing, and even the way you were, conducting your session. It's really innovative, I would say. I'm Hanan Malkawi. I'm from Jordan. I'm a biologist. So my question is really, what are the challenges? I mean, there are challenges you faced when you applied your approach or your system, knowing that even at the individual level, we all have the same DNA, but we are different. Everybody has a different genetic fingerprint. Even identical twins are not the same. So when you applied your system, I would really like to hear what are the challenges, and do you have to cater your system to fit the priority for individual or even at a country level? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just a little snippets, but one of the things is, let's be able to, if you become better at making maps. Maps were an invention, huh? We didn't always have maps, but maps, we invented maps, and then we put them in. But then if you get better at making maps, you can throw them away. You don't have to keep them. And you don't have to keep them precisely because you're not all the same. Why should your map be my map? And if I make my map one day this way, then maybe you make your map this way another day. And that means that we have this ongoing, multi-dimensional conversation amongst ourselves, but also within ourselves, to understand where we're at and what's going on. And it becomes emergent as well. In other words, it respects biology, in fact. So there's a lot of biomimicry in what we're talking about. And biomimicry doesn't give us an answer, but it makes us able to understand what it means to live in an evolutionary, creative context. So, some quick thoughts?
About the maps, I like the analogy. I would like to suggest you can make maps with different criteria. Oh. So the things that you, prioritize in one map are different from the ones you prioritize in the other. None of them is the map with a big T, like with a big true. But the fact that you have exercised in making these different maps with different criteria give you elasticity of the mind, I would say, and the capability to see different things.
Yeah, thank you. I want to, Real talked about the push, but also in education, also about the pull from the future, right? And we say, let's prepare students for the future, but it's impossible to prepare for something that doesn't exist. Right? It's just really, really hard. So what we need is just a different outlook and a different relationship towards how we deal with complexity and uncertainty. And what I see is that students often feel overpowered, that it is something, like you were saying, it's static, it's there, and I just need to prepare myself for it. But what we see, if we educate them in future literacy, which means imagining multiple futures, we see a rise in self-efficacy, a rise in empathy, because they place themselves in a generation that's not born yet by thinking about multiple futures, rise in creativity, and just ultimately a lot less personal need for structure, and just a lot more comfortable with not knowing. And I think this is what this is about, is that you're not trying to prepare for something that we don't know what people are going to care about in 40, 50, 60 years. We just don't know. We only know what we care about today, and we can use the future to do it.
as tall as this, but that's fine. Actually, you know, I can switch eyes. Yeah, that's all good. Actually, I'm bouncing back on what Liz just said in terms of what it means to be ready, because we hear a lot about, you know, strategic planning. How can we plan better in order to become the people that we believe that we're supposed to be? And in that sense, I believe that it comes from a good initiative, which is to say that we want to become better people. But in the meantime, it also questions what it means to be a better person. And so what's at the core of those collective intelligence knowledge creation processes is actually the way you define yourself does not depend only on yourself, but so it depends on the group, but also the group allows you to understand a little bit better who you are as well. So building on that, the idea is maybe to come and define new shared meanings that would enable you to actually become a better self, but by thinking that being ready is a bit different from what we think readiness is about. In that sense, I would encourage you to come tomorrow in order to think about it a little bit more.
Thanks. Just to come back to your question on challenges, I mean, I've been thinking about that from the point of view of a profession, not a person or a country. I'm thinking, how do you actually take a profession that has very deeply rooted morals and values and expectations from outside the community as well as inside the community, and begin to introduce a change into that? And I don't have an answer for that. But if you have an answer, I would love to hear it. But it's an ongoing challenge, and I think it probably reflects a lot of communities and a lot of countries, how they actually change their thinking to have that futures literacy competency.
Final word. Again, challenges was the thing that provoked my mind, and I think it's not just the individual's DNA that is different in each situation. It's also the aim of the exercise that you're involved in. And so I have done very different things to do with the future, whether it's creating personas, writing poems, developing statistical models, when that was the right thing to do to answer the question in the decision-making context I was in. And so some people, and in some jurisdictions or countries that I've worked in, imagery works brilliantly. In other places, it's about statistics and slide decks, and because that is the language where conviction happens. And sometimes I'm one of those people, and sometimes I'm another one of those people, depending on the context I'm in. So really asking what you're trying to get out of a futures exercise. Is it a policy decision? Is it imagination? Is it provocation of how different the world could be? And then deciding from there how you're going to use the future. And it's always different. And I've often spent 6 months just on that part of a project in order to get it right.
I like the question that you asked about what should we teach for the future. I look at the programs, I open the books, I look at the contents. It's so outdated. It's serving no purpose. I would like to focus on the things that are what we consider disruptive phenomena of the future. We talk about climate change. There's no content for climate change. There's no content for renewable energy. Very small. You need to reach probably the engineering level to reach that. And at the same time, we're teaching the table of chemistry that I've never used in my life. Never used it. The health sciences, life, you know, the human body is being replaced by different components, artificial components. Those are disruptive phenomena. Computers replacing human beings, those are disruptive phenomena. Artificial intelligence, we need to teach that as a must course that starts from primary, not at the engineering level. And the last thing is society as it's changing. Look how what's happening now in Asia is affecting the whole world. So these are the future things that we need to teach our students. And in terms of the challenges, a lot of challenges. We're still, the whole thing about our education system is we're just testing memory. You just have to learn by heart and you become a doctor. You just have to memorize. So no using your brain as a processing, no individualization of education. You go like a train at the same speed for everybody. So that's the challenge. We need to work more on individualizing education. And I believe technology can help. Thank you.
I hope that this was interesting. Let me just kind of end on this point. Tomorrow, we will provide some experience and work with whoever decides to come, so you're all welcome. Please volunteer, sign up for tomorrow's session to experience a little bit of what it's like to work on your imagination, see that your imagination can have different reasons for being created, different methods, different ways of creating that imagination, but also to see the distinction that is in some ways quite difficult in many parts of the world, which is to see that the only legacy, constancy, the only thing that we can give to the future, really give to the future, other than pollution and pyramids and things that we've created physically, plastic in the ocean, is what we do with our values now. The way we express our values in the present is our gift to the future. And that means you don't have to justify what you're doing on the basis of, oh, I know what's good for my grandchildren. My grandchildren should use cars because cars are such a great thing. No. My grandchildren, they'll decide what to do themselves. I believe in them. They're smart, they're able. What I can leave for them is that I've tried to do things that I think are about biodiversity, about climate change, about equality, about the values that I have now. And if I can express those values because my imagination enables me, my strong imagination enables me to see new things in the present, to do things in the present on the basis of that imagination, I can come closer to living my values now. And that's my gift to the future. That's my legacy to tomorrow. Thank you.
Merci. Merci Riel, merci Luz, Claudia, Eva et tout le monde.